Okay, so thanks Asha, and thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'm glad it's not my birthday because the last time I was here, not here, but at RMIT presenting across the road with Anastasia and Asha, it was my birthday and Asha had the whole entire audience sing me happy birthday, which was very embarrassing. So I'll be speaking for the next 20 minutes about image-based abuse. What is it and why does it cause so much harm? So let me start with the term revenge porn. Revenge porn is a media-generated term that is widely understood as the sharing or distribution of nude or sexual images by jilted ex-lovers whose primary motivations are to get revenge in the aftermath of a breakup. This term has been helpful in terms of raising attention to this issue because it's catchy and it's somewhat salacious. However, there are a number of good reasons for why we should reject this term. The term is a misnomer because it only captures a very narrow set of behaviours. So for example, it doesn't capture the different range of motivations beyond that of revenge. So for example, blackmail, extortion, control, sexual gratification, voyeurism, social status building and monetary gain. The focus of revenge porn is narrowly also on the distribution of nude or sexual images. So what that means is that it fails to take into account other forms of image-based abuse. So for example, the non-consensual taking or creation of a nude or sexual image, and also the making of threats to distribute intimate images. Revenge porn also likens non-consensual imagery to the production of commercial pornography, when many images that are shared without consent have very little in common with mainstream porn. We also argue that it minimises the harm to victims. The term also has victim-blaming connotations because it implies somewhat that the victim was complicit in the construction or creation of pornography. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, the term revenge porn focuses on the content of the image rather than on the abusive action of perpetrators. And this isn't a case of mere semantics. The term revenge porn, for example, can be a deterrent for victims coming forward to report their experiences. The term may also lead to problematic attitudes and beliefs within the community that blame victims for their actions. And this can in turn lead to an absence in the creation of new laws to address this problem, or it can also lead to the development of ill-informed laws, policies and educational programs as well. So just to give you a quick example, in the UK, in England and Wales, new legislation came into force in 2015. And that new criminal law in the UK makes the disclosure of private sexual photographs or films without consent a criminal offence. Now this sounds okay, right? Especially compared to most Australian jurisdictions when there are actually no specific criminal offences in place to address this issue. But the problem is, with the UK law, the prosecution must prove that the perpetrator intended to cause distress or harm to the victim. So what that means is that in the UK, the law doesn't include the threats to distribute or share images, nor does it catch people who don't have the specific intent to cause distress or harm to victims. And what we're talking about here are people that are trading in intimate or sexual or nude images online in secret, which is happening a lot, unfortunately. So they're not trying to publicly humiliate the victim, so therefore they're not intentionally trying to cause distress or harm. But what they're doing maybe is that they're swapping images online in secret. And so under UK law, those individuals would not be able to be prosecuted. And this, we believe, is really problematic, and we believe that it's a direct result from the problematic terminology that frames all image-based abuse as being all about revenge. So we prefer the term image-based abuse. We argue that that includes three main behaviours. The first is the non-consensual taking or creation of nude or sexual images. The second is the non-consensual distribution or sharing of nude or sexual images. And the third is the making threats to distribute those images. And what we want to emphasise is that image-based abuse is incredibly complex and incredibly diverse. It involves a whole set of different motivations beyond that of revenge. It's been perpetrated by intimate partners, ex-partners, acquaintances, work colleagues, family members and strangers. It's perpetrated in public and private spaces. But image-based abuse is actually not real. I'm sorry, not real. It's not new. It is real. It's very real. In Victoria, there was a well-known case from many years ago where the defendant had taken sex videos of himself and his partner. After they broke up, he threatened to show the tapes to the victim's employer, before then proceeding to show them to her family, friends and employer as well. And then there's another well-known case from the 1980s that concerns the men's magazine Hustler magazine, who had a long-running feature called Beaver Hunt. Sorry, my dad's here. I'm sorry about the content. But Beaver Hunt, which is where readers could submit photographs of women's vaginas that were published in the Hustler magazine on a monthly basis. Like the contemporary forms of image-based abuse that Anastasia and Asher and I are looking at, many of these photographs that were submitted to Hustler magazine were not consensually distributed, and many were accompanied by personal details about the women in the images. Several women sued the magazine for publishing the photographs without their permission. So what we've done is we've put together a typology or a kind of categorisation of image-based abuse which clearly identifies the different types of behaviours involved. So I'm just going to go through these quickly now. The first is relationship retribution. This is kind of the typical revenge porn type scenario, where revenge is actually the motivation in the context of a current or past intimate relationship. But this is not necessarily restricted to a couple in an intimate relationship. So for instance, a perpetrator might be the new partner who shares images of their current partner's ex, or it may be an ex-partner who shares images of their former partner's new partner. Don't worry, that's utterly confusing. But I'll give you an example just to highlight what we mean here. So for example, in 2014, a 28-year-old woman in Virginia was charged with the unlawful dissemination or sale of images of another, after she stole a nude image of her ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend and posted it online. We have so many examples that are coming up in the media about ex-partners putting nude images on Facebook, for instance, as a form of revenge. So in 2012, for example, in the first social networking related conviction in Australia, a Sydney man received a 6-month jail sentence after he posted 6 nude images of his former girlfriend on Facebook. After he posted the images on Facebook, he emailed his ex-girlfriend with the message, "Some of your photos are now on Facebook." 3 months earlier, the girl had ended their relationship and had moved out of their shared home. She pleaded with him to remove the images from Facebook, but when he refused, she went to the police. Now, he wasn't charged or convicted under any so-called revenge porn legislation in New South Wales because New South Wales doesn't have any specific criminal offences in place, but rather he was charged with another criminal offence, which was publishing an indecent article. And in fact, some of you may not know this, but in Australia there are only 2 jurisdictions, so 2 states that have specific criminal offences in place. One is Victoria and the other is South Australia. Other states and territories are currently considering introducing new criminal offences, but at present victims have limited redress options in jurisdictions without specific offences in place, unless the behaviour can be somehow prosecuted under existing criminal laws. So for example, stalking. But the problem with stalking is that it requires that the victim is fearful for their safety, and it also requires a course of conduct. So a one-off instant of sharing or distributing a nude or a sexual image wouldn't meet the criteria under stalking legislation in Australian states and territories. The other thing just to note is that at the federal level there is no specific criminal offence in place either in Australia. So victims do have other options. They can sue perpetrators in civil courts for breach of copyright law, for sexual harassment if the behaviour, for instance, took place in a workplace context, and also for breach of confidence as well. All right, so the second type that we have is what we call sextortion. This is a form of blackmail or extortion where the perpetrator threatens to share or distribute nude or sexual images in order to obtain further images, to obtain money, or to otherwise coerce the victim into a non-consensual sexual act or some other kind of act. So some instances of sextortion involve what is commonly now known as webcam blackmail. So just as an example, in the US, a 19-year-old computer science student obtain naked images of multiple victims using malware to hack into their webcams, and then threatened to distribute the images if the victims did not send him more images or go on a webcam chat with him. And I know that's really scary to think about people being able to break into your webcam in your private home. Sextortion is also common in domestic violence contexts. So, for example, an abusive partner or ex-partner threatens that they will share or distribute nude or sexual images in order to prevent the victim from leaving the relationship, in order to prevent the victim from pursuing an intervention order, or coercing them into engaging in unwanted sexual acts. Now, again, just to highlight the existing legislation in the Australian context in relation to threatening to distribute images, or sextortion as it's also known, only in Victoria and South Australia are there criminal offences around making threats to distribute intimate or invasive images. Other states and territories are currently considering introducing new criminal offences, but as I mentioned, at the federal level, there's no specific criminal offence for these types of behaviours either. And really what we have to rely on are blackmail, stalking and computer hacking criminal offences that we can actually use in relation to these types of behaviours. Okay, so moving on, the third type of image-based abuse that we use in our research is voyeurism. This includes where a perpetrator is seeking to either create or distribute or share images as a form of sexual gratification or as a form of voyeurism. So it can include things like upskirting and down-blousing, also this new phenomenon called wife swapping that's happening on the internet, where people are swapping pictures, nude and sexual pictures of their wives and their girlfriends. One example, which is quite a well-known example in the Australian context, concerns the Skype case from a few years ago, where two Australian Defence Force cadets secretly filmed a consensual sexual encounter in one room, and they set up a live streaming via Skype in the next room with a whole bunch of other guys to watch. So that's an example of our third type of image-based abuse. But sexual gratification isn't always the only goal in this category. So, for instance, a few years ago, a nurse took a photograph of the victim's genitals while she was under anaesthetic, apparently not for sexual gratification reasons, but the victim suspected that she was making fun of her body size. Okay, so the fourth type is sexploitation. This is where the primary goal is to obtain monetary benefits through the trade in non-consensual images. And what we're really talking about here are website moderators and hosts who host non-consensual images on so-called revenge porn websites. So there's a very famous example in the US. YouGot Posted website operator Kevin Bollard received an 18-year sentence in a California court for extortion and identity fraud after running a revenge porn site which hosted thousands of nude or sexual images of women without their consent. He then used another website to extort money from each victim who requested to have their images from the site removed, and he amassed approximately $40,000 over a 10-month period, and of course he also received profits through advertising on his main revenge porn site. And finally, I do also want to mention the last category of sexual assault imagery. And this is where perpetrators or bystanders record sexual assaults and rapes on mobile phones and other devices and then share those images either through mobile phone or through the internet. And a very famous example is the 2012 Steubenville, Ohio case, where the rape of an unconscious 16-year-old girl was recorded and shared on mobile phones and via social media. But closer to home in Sydney very recently, a teenage boy from an exclusive private school allegedly raped a 15-year-old girl at a house party in Sydney, while his friend filmed the rape on his mobile phone, which was later released on social media some days later and distributed to at least 50 teenagers. So implicit in our typology are a range of perpetrator motivations. So as you can see with the examples I've just given, not all of these cases are about revenge. They're also about sexual gratification, voyeurism, social status building, monetary gain, control and humiliation. This is quite depressing material, sorry, for a Friday evening. But this is just an example here. We're currently partnering with the Office of the Children's E-Safety Commissioner to do further research into image-based abuse online, on online sites. So the type of kind of revenge porn websites or ex-girlfriend websites, and this is just one example, called myex.com, which allows people to post nude or sexual images of an ex-partner. And as you can see from the slide, the site allows users to upload images alongside identifying information, such as their name, their country, nickname, age, state or region. Plus, it allows users to post comments or a story to accompany the images. So this is the form that they can fill out where they give all the information about the victim who's depicted in the image. That's right. So what I want to also point out is that, as I've already mentioned, not all perpetrators are motivated out of the desire to seek revenge or retribution, but rather they're trading in non-consensual imagery in secret on internet sites, for example. And their intention, therefore, is that victims do not find out about the trade in those images. And really what we're seeing is a massive increase in popularity in relation to subgenres of pornography. So amateur pornography is very popular, as well as webcam porn, ex-girlfriend or girlfriend porn, wife porn and ex-wife porn, and also mom or mum porn as well. So really that just gives us a bit of an indication about what's actually kind of happening in these online sites, and the research that we're currently doing with the E-Safety Commission will further yield some interesting insights into that. So we published an article in The Conversation on Monday this week. We've had a busy week with obviously the results of our survey coming out. And interestingly, the first comment that was posted in relation to our article from Craig reads as, "Revenge porn? Seriously, aren't there any real issues for criminologists to attend to?" And I noticed the second comment on in relation to our conversation article was from Yosei, who responded to Craig and said, quote, "I just hope to hell that none of my daughters end up with someone with your morals. It'll be short-lived and I'll end up being charged for something." That's not my quote. But what we didn't respond to Craig because we get this kind of comment all the time, you know, that what's the big deal? We're making out a mountain out of a molehill, whatever that saying is. But what I really want to just reflect on here in the last couple of minutes that I have is that this is a very common attitude within the community, and I think we do need to engage with it, and it's not just amongst the people that comment on conversation articles. Image-based abuse is trivialised, it's minimised, and there's a lot of victim blaming. So a lot of the line is it's the victim's fault for having taken an image of themselves and shared the image thereafter. So let me just kind of wrap up by reflecting on the harms and impacts of image-based abuse, just in case Craig is here tonight. So the diverse impacts, I think the first thing to note is that the diverse impacts on victims, that victims are not a homogeneous group, they're very different, but increasingly this is being recognised as a serious and significant problem. So first of all, victims, it depends on the context. Not all victims are in fact victims. In fact, for some it's just not a big deal if their nude or sexual images are distributed, or if someone takes an image of them without their consent. But for some, it's a really big deal, it's enormous impacts, and it will really depend on a range of different factors. So what was the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator? What were the motivations of the perpetrator for sharing the images? How far and wide were those images shared? Were they shown from one person to the next? Or did they go viral on the internet and were they seen by hundreds or even millions of people? The content of the image will also have a bearing on the harm experienced by victims. Was the image a nude or a semi-nude image? Were the victim's genitals exposed? Was it of an unwanted sexual act or a consensual sexual encounter? And was the victim's face shown? It would be nice if we lived in a society where there wasn't shame around our bodies and our sexuality, but unfortunately socially sanctioned attitudes and beliefs towards gender and sexuality in particular mean that nude and sexual images are a particularly powerful weapon for motivated perpetrators. The impacts may be even more pronounced for victims from particular ethnic, religious and other communities. Image-based abuse often leads to humiliation and embarrassment, which can then of course lead to severe anxiety, depression, social withdrawal and other mental health effects. In Canada, a researcher did some interviews with image-based abuse victims, finding that those participants described symptoms that were consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, with depression, anxiety and other mental health effects. Anna will also speak a little bit more about the findings of our survey in relation to the impacts of image-based abuse. But it's not just the mental health effects. Image-based abuse can lead to other harms. So for instance, victims may be subjected to further harassment, bullying and abuse, both online and offline, by strangers and persons known to them. They may miss out on job opportunities. They may lose their job. Some victims have been forced to change their name, their address, their job and their identity. There have also been reports of other forms of interpersonal violence such as sexual violence, rape, sexual assault and also stalking. And finally, image-based abuse can lead to suicide or attempted suicide. Only a few days ago, a case was reported in the media where a young Canberra man committed suicide after he was blackmailed by a teenager who preyed on men on gay dating apps and threatened to publicly out him unless he pay him money. Other suicides have also been reported. For example, in 2010, Tyler Clementi jumped to his death after his roommate had used a webcam to record him kissing another man without his permission or knowledge. In 2016, an Italian woman committed suicide after she was subjected to a huge amount of online abuse after explicit images and a video of her went viral on the internet. So that's it from me. The results of our study, as Anna will now explain, really do highlight the serious impacts of image-based abuse. So Craig, if you're out there, hopefully you have changed your mind, and the reason why the term revenge porn is so problematic. Thanks.